Hi, everyone. Welcome to the presentation. I'm pretty excited to get to talk to you a little bit about stress and, more importantly, how it can relate to our immune system. So we're going to go ahead and start with the slides. But before I do, I'm going to give you a little bit of a heads up. I have a gift card here for our health gym at Grit River Medical Center. And for those who participate, you're going to be entered into a drawing to win a 1-month membership to the gym. So hopefully you guys can follow along and make some comments, ask some questions along the way, and then we'll see who wins at the end of the presentation. So let's go ahead and get started with the slides. All right, so today, yes, we are going to talk about stress and immunity. So my very first question for you guys is, how many of you ever felt any of these things that are on the slide? It could be, a feeling, it could be a sensation, it could be feeling just overwhelmed, and you're not really sure how it is, but how many of you have actually ever felt one or maybe multiple of those things? That's kind of like one of the big things that we're looking at when it comes to stress. Sensations, feelings, emotions, physical, anything of that nature. So I'm assuming that many of you have felt maybe tired, of course, maybe some anxiety, especially this last year because of COVID. Maybe that you're just feeling like you don't have enough sleep or it's being disrupted because of some type of stress. Well, I want to let you know that more importantly, you're not alone, right? Stress is very common. And according to the American Psychology Association, we have some of the top tier stressors here in America, not necessarily in other countries. But specifically, money and work are our top two stressors. Roughly around 67% to 65% of most people say that those are their major stressors. That's kind of alarming, right? Especially when they go hand in hand, right? We also find that family responsibilities and health concerns, along with health problems in the family, along with the economy, are really close at around 50% or so and above. So we find that stress in the United States is quite common. And the problem is that generally we see that stress happens more so in adults. Yet we're seeing so many more younger people having stress. So if you notice the graphs, right, it shows that women tend to express that they have more stress than men do. And you'll also notice that our younger generations have more stress. So overall, why might that be, right? Why do we see that women say they have more stress, or that our younger generations compared to our older generations, like baby boomers, have more stress? Well, maybe it's to do with technology, right? It's customary to not take very long vacations like maybe we used to, or shorter lunch breaks, doing more with less, fearful for what employers might say, or maybe it's just that they're not resilient enough. But overall, adults rate their average stress as a level of 5.1 on a 10-point scale, where 1 is little or no stress and 10 is a great deal of amount of stress. And that's slightly up from 4.9 back in 2014. So we know that stress is occurring. It's just sometimes they occur in different ways, or they come about in different challenges to men versus female, and our younger generations to our older generations. Now, when it comes to stress in general, defining it can be a little difficult, right? I think that most people can obviously say, yes, I have experienced stress, and I feel like I know what it is for me. But the problem is that there are so many definitions of stress that it's hard to just give you one clear-cut viewpoint, right? Everyone is going to perceive stress as something very different. A lot of times you will hear that it's just a normal part of life, right? And it just comes about in the challenges that we face. But many will say that there is wear and tear on the body, that there is a loss of emotional control. Maybe it's just the inability to deal with our daily problems, or feeling a sense of threat that can occur overall. But when we have stress, right, there's a response. And this response is created because we have a challenge in front of us and we need to determine how to deal with this. Now, the really great thing about stress is that it can be both challenging in a negative concept, but it can also be challenging in a positive concept, maybe helping us to motivate to do something. Now, when we encounter good motivating stress, we call it eustress. And eustress is sometimes when you can feel slightly overwhelmed, but it motivates you to work harder and maybe perform better. And that's really what we encourage to try people to perceive stress as, but that doesn't always happen. Now, the crazy thing about stress, though, is that I don't think people realize that when you encounter that stressor or that challenge, so to speak, your memory has now kind of filed it away, right? The brain creates this experience of, right, this is my challenge, and this is how I dealt with it. And so that way, when you face that challenge again, it knows what to do. So the problem now becomes if you have more distress in your life, the negative outcomes of it, your body's going to ultimately try and do that same thing, and you're probably going to feel negative again. So that's why we have to become very aware of what's happening so that you become equipped to deal with the coping techniques that are more positive so that we can come out on the other side a little bit better. So here's my big question, right? And maybe you don't want to answer it. Maybe it's a little bit more personal. But when you feel stressed, how do you react? Maybe it's an emotion. Maybe it's a behavior, so to speak. Maybe you do nothing at all. But overall, how might you react when you are faced with a challenge, right? And you're trying to overcome that so that it no longer is affecting you. Does anybody have any ideas maybe, or want to express how they go through things? And that's okay. Sometimes it's a personal question. It's not always something that we need to always talk about all the time. But I'm going to give you an idea of what you might experience and maybe an understanding of why you might experience it. So overall, the idea is you're stressed, right? And we're looking at the immune system. I'm going to combine those two, but I'm going to talk about kind of why things occur the way that they do. So a little technological or scientific jargon here thrown your way for just a second. You have what is called the sympathetic nervous system, okay? The sympathetic nervous system is part of our autonomic nervous system, things that happen out of our control and we really don't have a lot of response to it. It just happens naturally, right? So when you encounter a stressor or a challenge in your life, you're going to activate the sympathetic nervous system, which is then going to activate what we call the fight or flight response. And I'm sure many of you have heard of that term before. It's very loosely used in most schools and classes and things of that nature. Okay? This sympathetic nervous system is pretty much going to be a connection of our brain to signals of the spinal cord and sends all kinds of things through what we call neurons, right? So what happens when this fight or flight response is activated? You may feel a lot of physiological changes occurring. Some of them may be very acute, some of them may happen a little bit later. But generally, we have rapid increases of our physical system, such as an increased blood flow to muscles. You might feel like red in the face at times, or maybe heat happening out in the limbs. That's because blood flow is pushing out to the muscles. It's also going to go to the brain as well, and that's going to help get that thinking process moving very quickly. It's going to go to the heart, which means your heart rate is going to increase, and then your lungs as well, and your breathing increases. So overall, it's stimulating your body because this challenge is thinking that you are under attack or there's a threat at nature. So we have to then decide, are we fighting or are we fleeing? And by pumping up the body and getting it ready to do that, you're charged. You're ready to go. It's like the Energizer Bunny. You also notice that maybe pupils might dilate a little bit. We have the increased body temperature and sweating. So sweaty hands if you get nervous, like, talking in front of people like this. And sometimes you may even have a dry mouth because decreased saliva occurs all the time. And so you might be drinking and sipping on water, and that might become a habit to do so. So it's kind of crazy that your body is getting ready because you are feeling there's a threat of some sort, right? Now, on the flip side, we also have something called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. The HPA axis is what we call it. This is actually going to help the sympathetic nervous system with the fight or flight response. So how many of you have probably heard of the term cortisol hormones? They are a very common stress hormone that is used a lot at doctors' offices, with therapists, with personal trainers, of sorts. When we look at the fight or flight response, okay, all of those changes that happen are coming from the idea of hormones making it happen, right? It's not just this little switch and saying, yep, my heart rate goes up. There are many hormones that are released to make it occur. And specifically, when we look at cortisol, it's going to be your main point of all of those changes. So cortisol increases in the body and does a lot of things to many different organs, right? And one of the big things that we see is it actually slows down the immune response. Not really a great thing for us specifically, but why does this happen? Here's a couple things. It stimulates the breakdown of our amino acids in our body, which is in our muscles, and it converts it to glucose so that way you're ready. You're charged, right? We've got all this extra blood flow to the body, and we also have all this extra energy should we need to fight. Hopefully we don't fight, or we run away, and hopefully we don't run away either, okay? It's also increasing the blood pressure so that you have an enhanced ability of the stress-related catecholamines to increase cardiac output. That's going to make the heart pump more, and that's why your heart rate goes up. And it's allowing that extra energy, all that glucose, to be pushed out to the muscles to be used. It's also helping to narrow and focus our intention so that way we can have an enhanced memory function for the circumstances that promoted that challenge. That's why it creates a memory in the brain. Cortisol is actually a good thing for us, and yet so many people think it's too bad, and it can be at a point. So initially, when we get stressed, we end up getting this influx of cortisol, and it lowers and kind of dampens the immune response in a very acute phase. So how does this really become a bad thing for us? Well, I'm going to show you. You have to understand stress and the whole idea of how it works first, okay? This is a stress model. It's very easy, right, to understand. And you notice that it also looks like a cycle, right? It has a cyclic effect. I'm going to explain why that is here in a second. So let's say we all have a stressor, right? We come about a challenge, it affects us, and immediately we have the ability to say, does that affect us negatively, or are we going to be motivated by it, which is the perception of the stressor, okay? As soon as we have the perception of the stressor, now we have a response. The fight or flight system kicks in, and it happens because of our emotional arousal. Did you have the negative feelings of stress and anxiety, right? Anger, fear, or were you like, okay, not a big deal, right? And then that turn leads to the cortisol to go ahead, be released, and then you have a physiological arousal happening. All of those changes that we just talked about. Now, if those physiological arousal keeps happening over and over again, right, consequences can happen. I'm going to give you a little scenario here. Not a great one, but I think you'll understand it. Let's say through the pandemic of COVID-19, right, a lot of businesses shut down. It might have led to people getting laid off, less hours of work. That was a major stressor. And probably more often than not, people thought that that was very distressing, which led to emotions of anxiety and fear, right? How am I going to pay my bills because I'm not working as much as I should? Which led to all these physical arousals, and the feeling of anxiety was kicking in. If that was not able to be dealt with appropriately and coped, many times people can have a consequence of it. So let's say that that consequence was you lashing out at the ones you loved because you didn't know how to direct that stress. And then that created an argument between two people or multiple people that necessarily may not needed to happen, which now created a new stressor. So ultimately, we have primary stressors that start the cycle, but if you don't cut the cycle, you get secondary stressors, and the cycle just keeps going over and over and over. So understanding the way stress happens and why is a big point of it. So now we understand that stress can be good for us, but it's chronic stress that becomes a big problem if that cycle keeps going over and over and over again. So what happens? When you're stressed and you're feeling like you're under attack, there's a threat, and we allow that to keep going on and on and on, the body's processes become disrupted. So all of those organ systems that we just talked about occur. And now we're going to get back to the idea of cortisol and why cortisol in chronic stress is bad for us and lowers our immunity, right? So what ends up happening is, at first, when you're stressed, you have a high level of cortisol that is put into the body, right? But you don't cope with the stress. So what ends up happening is your body actually becomes desensitized to cortisol. And you actually end up lowering your level of cortisol, which you would think would be great, right? But not really, because cortisol helps with other processes. And one of the big things is, if you have a low level of cortisol, then you're going to have a decreased anti-inflammatory response. This is not great, right? Anti-inflammatory is a good thing. You want to get rid of inflammation. But if you have a lower response to that, well, inflammation tends to build. And as that inflammation tends to build, that's where we start to see damage being done to the body. And specifically, it does it to our immune response. The other thing that happens is, because we have a low immunity, we also get a decreased amount of natural killer cells. We call them NK cells. And natural killer cells is what helps ward off the bad guys, so to speak, right? Viruses, bacteria, and things that happen in the body. So if we have high inflammation, it starts damaging cells and tissues, we have a low amount of natural killer cells, we start to have the ability for your body to get sick easier. So I'm going to give you this analogy because I think you'll probably understand a little bit better. How many of you probably first started drinking coffee, and after maybe your first cup of coffee, you're like, oh, I feel great. Caffeine is kicking in. I've got the energy. But over a period of time, your body got desensitized by the caffeine. And it took more than one cup of coffee to get through your morning. Maybe it was two. And then after months, maybe years, you needed a cup of coffee in the afternoon, right? Just to get through your day. And you could literally get to the end of your day and still drink coffee and be able to go to bed because the caffeine really wasn't working the way it was supposed to. This is what happens in the body, right? Your level of cortisol becomes desensitized and it cannot work appropriately. So this is kind of a good, picture to depict what happens. Initially, what we see is that you have an alarm response. The trigger of stressor comes in. You have resistance, right? We're trying to figure out a way to deal with the stressor. But if you become desensitized and not able to cope, we plummet down into an exhaustion phase. And in this exhaustion phase, this is where we see chronic stress set in. The immune response weakens tremendously, and it allows pathogens to enter the body and take over, and illnesses occur, right? We get sick, something happens. We call this the general adaptation syndrome. It's not something that's ideal for us, but you've probably felt it before and you have witnessed it. So we want to try to get rid of the idea of chronic stress to boost our immune system overall, okay? Now, stress is a global pandemic. It's kind of crazy to think of that way, but get this. The World Health Organization has said that stress is a global epidemic, right? In fact, many stress researchers have even said it's the Black Plague of the 21st century. How crazy. And especially now, that was like 2 years ago that came out. With the COVID, We definitely know that that's the case now. 60% of illness and disease is caused by stress. It's dumbfounding, right? 60%. That means 3 out of 4 doctor's visits are due to stress. Why are people going to the doctor? Well, more than 75% of them have physical stress symptoms. Have you ever felt chronic headaches, nausea, heartburn? Your sleep was an issue. Maybe you felt anxious. Maybe you were feeling a little depressed. Muscle pain, chest pain, right? It's going on and on and on. And you see all these symptoms, and yet people aren't realizing, oh, stress is causing this, because you think something else is. So nearly 3 in 5 adults say that they could have used more emotional support within the last year. It's totally true, right? The pandemic has been an issue for most people. People are not talking about stress enough. And more than now, we see emotional health being treated a lot. Mental health psychologists, counselors are all-time busy. Our department here, like, they just can't catch a break. And it's because people need to talk about stress a little bit more, right? Stress-related ailments cost the nation roughly $300 billion every year in medical bills and lost productivity. It's an issue. We've got to start working with it. But people don't talk about it, so they end up with negative coping behaviors. And negative coping behaviors could be anything in the lines of feeling denial, right? They're abusing alcohol or over-the-counter drugs or recreational drugs. Sometimes it's stress eating, right? We've probably all been there before. Your hand gets to the bottom of the bag and you're like, whoa, what happened? And then all of a sudden you're like, I ate the whole thing. I've been there. I've done that. It could be alienation, right? Not letting people in, or displaced anger or emotions towards others who kind of take the beating of it. Procrastination, which is a huge one, and I'll talk about that here in a second. And maybe even a little bit of self-pity. These are all negative coping behaviors that allow people to feel those physical ailments of stress that might push them into more doctor's visits, right? Ultimately, all these are called their strains. Strains are outcomes of poor stress reactivity and things that we can actually work on. So go back to this model, right? We just kind of looked at it a little bit. Fight, flight, freeze. It's kind of an interesting concept. I'm going to give you a little background. I am a wellness specialist, right? I build wellness programs for companies, and specifically Greater Burlington Partnership is one of my companies, and I get to work with them. In 2017, I went to a conference. It was the Wellness Council of America conference. Fantastic. I learned so much great new information. And specifically, that conference had a lot to do about brain health and stress. One of the topics that I learned about was the new idea of what we call mental paralysis. Okay, mental paralysis, what could that be? So in our day and age, right, there's not really a ton of stressors that really truly threaten our life, so to speak. I mean, day in and day out, you kind of have the same routine, right? So since most of our day-to-day stressors are not life-threatening, people get caught in a freeze response, which is actually part of the flight response, right? The flight part hits a roadblock and you just can't move forward. So somewhere in this model, you hit a roadblock and you can't progress. We can't get out of the cycle, so to speak. Tends to be more of an overwhelming feeling more than anything. There's a flood of thoughts, lots of emotions, and we end up going down a rabbit hole. And this rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper, and you're just not able to dig out of it. It's like going to bed at night, getting on YouTube or I don't know, something, and you start going down a rabbit hole of looking at videos, and 30 minutes later, you're like, what did I start this process? And I've allowed myself to waste 30 minutes. It's kind of that, right? You get this overwhelming flood of emotions that just sends you down deeper into the hole. Well, the big thing is, if we're talking about stress and immunity and how we function with it, our emotional arousal is the root to all of our behaviors. It's the root to how we deal with the consequences, or not, because maybe we could have stopped it right there. So the emotions that we feel when we encounter a stressor makes us feel like our life is in danger, or maybe in turn pushes our body to respond in that way. Fear and anger are your two top emotions that push you into this fight, flight, maybe freeze pattern where you can't get out of it. So I want to talk a lot about how we can change that, how we can move past a poor emotional arousal response to stress. So when we talk about the idea of emotion, right, we have to backtrack. So we have to have a perception of a stressor. So to help prevent stress, it would be ideal to have a more positive perception to things. Easier said than done, for sure, right? The problem is that our past experiences influence our present perceptions probably more than the actual stressor itself. Go back to the beginning of the presentation. I said that our brain creates a memory for the stressor we encounter and the way that we deal with it. So it's like this automatic shoot of, all right, here, this is what you need to do, versus me stopping, thinking, and really kind of putting together a better idea of the puzzle and making a decision that way. That's just not how our brain works. It's automatic. So how can we change the perception of our stressor? Well, here's a few things you can stop yourself from maybe going down that rabbit hole and asking yourself these couple questions. How do my thoughts relate to the way I experience stress, right? Are you like this negative Nancy all the time, or are you able to kind of stop and maybe put things in perspective? And then what tools and techniques can help manage my thoughts and perceptions to prevent stress and enhance the quality of my life, right? We all want a good quality of life, and that is the end result. But it starts with this, the perception of the stressor, because stressors begin with a thought, it leads with the emotion, and that triggers the fight or flight response. So we've got to stop the thought. These are all positive coping techniques, right, that we can try and use. And these are just a few of them. I could go on a tangent on stress management because there's so many different techniques out there, but I'm going to try and pull out maybe some of more of the better and easier ones that you can tackle. So just as a reminder, the goal is not to avoid all stress. Stress is important to our lives. We need it because it can be good to us and help motivate us, right? So we need to keep things in mind that when you feel stress, it's all right. But now let's move past it. So the first one we're going to talk about is meet your basic needs. This is simple, right? You would think that these would be the easiest to achieve, right? A good sleep, balanced diet, good exercise, making sure that we're healthy with our doctor. Again, no, these actually are probably the hardest because you get into this routine of like fast pace. We forget to take care of ourselves. We're taking care of other people first. And then we sit in the background and then slowly start to have this degrading health. So sleep is your best friend. We all love sleep, and I'm sure you do too. Most adults need around 7 to 8 hours of good sleep at night, but yet 60% of Americans are sleep deprived. 60%, right? That means we're either getting less than that amount of sleep or we're trying to get that amount and the quality is really bad. How does sleep relate to all this? Well, if you have a sleep deprivation, right, it lowers your immune response even further. When you sleep, that is when your body recharges and reheals everything that's gone wrong in a day. But poor sleep is also going to disrupt your hormones, and it increases your risk of illness and disease. In fact, it can accelerate your brain health aging by 3 to 5 years. That's not a good thing, right? And overall, we know it leads to a poor quality of life. So it's important that you create a sleep routine, right? Have a nice, cool, comfortable space that you sleep in. Avoid naps that are longer than 45 minutes and set boundaries for that bedroom, especially if you have pets and children who like to crawl in there in the middle of the night. It can be difficult, I'm sure. So overall, when it comes to sleep, we just really want to make sure that we focus on quality more than anything. But we also need to talk about our diet. And I'm sure you have all been there. Your diet ranges from good days and bad days, and that is perfectly okay. When it comes to your diet, I think most people don't realize that the foods that you consume create a stress response inside of us, specifically stimulants, like caffeine, right? We talked about the coffee part. If you are consuming a lot of foods that create a stimulus to increase the heart rate, increase the blood pressure, that's not a good thing for us. So we need to lower those types of foods, specifically processed foods that have very little fiber and have lots of sugar to it, because that allows inflammation to build. And we also need to do more fiber-based foods that are fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean meats, and lots of water. Some other things that can cause this stimulus of a fight or flight response in the body are things that create acid reflux. So red meat is a big one, tomatoes, garlic, onions, spices found in like Mexican food or even Chinese food, Indian food, those can also do it as well. So think about the perimeter of your grocery store, right? All the good whole foods. And then physical activity, of course, right? Being active throughout the day is very important. And yet here we are sitting at our desks, right? And not being active. So it can be very difficult to achieve your 150 minutes every single week of physical activity. But stress and physical activity work in a very synergistic way. It's fantastic. When you're stressed, your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up. We talked about that. So when you exercise or just become active, you are using those byproducts of stress to flip it, okay? When you exercise, dopamine and serotonin are released, and I'm sure you've heard of those before. They are this great euphoric type of sensation that makes you feel better. 10 minutes is all it takes for dopamine and serotonin to do its job to put you in a better mood and help to lower your stress. So if you're having a stressful day, maybe a 5 to 10 minute walk outside is all it takes for that quick little breather to bring the stress back down. So overall, we're trying to do a parasympathetic rebound, which is the exact opposite of the sympathetic nervous system of the fight or flight response. That's what exercise does for us. Okay? It redirects your attention to something more positive, it motivates you, and you just feel better overall. And of course, preventative exams. We can't forget those. Going to your doctor and getting your routine exams is so important because there's many times underlying issues that don't come to the surface and show symptoms. And so starting at the root problem is a very good thing to do. So I always encourage everyone to get their preventative exams based on their age and gender, even if they're not sick, because I hear a lot that people don't like to go to the doctor because they're not sick. And that's kind of where it first starts. The next one is simplifying your life. Oh, this one is probably good for everyone to hear. Simplifying your life is so important because we always take on more than we can probably do at that one time. So here's something you can do. Cut back on time commitments. How many of you have a really hard time saying no? I have a very hard time saying no to people, especially when they come to me because they know I can help. And I want to help someone, right? But sometimes you've got to say no because you need a break, right? You've got to set your priorities to make sure you get your things done first before you help anybody else. And a big thing that you can do is delegating, right? Helping others help you is a great thing, but try to get other people involved, especially when it comes to household chores. I'm sure that would be a good one. Simplifying your life can also mean of letting go of material things, right? I know I say drop a second job if you can. Not always everyone can do that. However, I'm a big fan of out with the old, in with the new, right? I have a garage sale every year. If I haven't used it in the year, it's gone. If I can let go of material things instead of holding on to it, I have less clutter and I feel a little less stressed as well. Trying to live within your means or even below your means. I'm a big one of looking at financial wellness, and this is part of that, okay? Trying to make sure that you have enough for later when things can go wrong, because things will, of course, we all know that. And then, of course, peace of mind may be worth more than a new car or new home, which kind of goes back to the idea of letting go of material things. So simplifying your life so that you're not overly, worked or being pulled in different directions is a really great thing to have. Now, this is where I shine because I'm a yoga teacher. And if you've never tried yoga before, I encourage you to do it, but I'm not going to pressure you because there's so many different ways that you can learn to relax and have some quality me time, so to speak. Relax techniques are great roadblocks between perception and emotional arousal phases of that cycle that we just talked about, right? Stop it in its tracks so that we don't have any consequences occur. Overall, learning to relax means becoming mindful of yourself. And mindfulness is just a focused mind because, again, hamster wheel, right? It just keeps going and going and going. And so it's nice to just stop and think about nothing for the 5, 10, 30 minutes or so that you choose to just focus on you. And these are all the different ways that you can do that. It could be meditation, right? And I know a lot of people might not understand meditation because they hear it in a different setting. But in our Western world, meditation is just simply quiet time, right? Not allowing outside external stressors or even the internal negative thoughts affect you. Meditation is typically done in yoga, of course, and there's so many different ways to do yoga. There's nice, slow, restorative. There's fast-paced, right, that gets you sweating. You can hang with goats. I mean, I've done goat yoga. There's so many different things you can do with it. Massage, of course, huge benefit of massage. Many of you may have had one and you've probably dozed off and you didn't realize it. So it's a great one to relax the muscles that tense because you're stressed. Progressive relaxation, right? I love progressive relaxation because you can do this anywhere and no one has to know that you're actually doing it. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate just a little bit of how you can do that. So it teaches you what muscle tension feels like and then also what muscle relaxation feels like. So ultimately you can do this from your computers. I won't even know because I can't see you. But if you take a deep inhale, shrug the shoulders up, hold it and hold your breath for 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Exhale, release. You've just felt what contraction is when you're bracing in the car driving versus relaxing and letting those shoulders come back down. You can do it for your entire body or you can do it for just maybe your shoulders because those are the ones that get tense the most. Diaphragmatic breathing. Fantastic way to relax. And I implore you to teach this to as many people as you possibly can. Children to old, it does not matter. Diaphragmatic breathing is what we call belly breathing. And you can see the motion of the lungs kind of inflating, right? And then deflating. This is showing you how to do diaphragmatic breath. So when you take a breath, we need to actually push down the diaphragm, which is the green thing underneath your lungs. So when you inhale, you want to pull that down. And we do that by pushing out the belly like a balloon. And then when you exhale, you squeeze that belly back in and it pushes the diaphragm up so that your lungs constrict and the air comes back out of the mouth. Belly breathing has been shown to reduce stress and cortisol within a matter of minutes, right? It can take just 5 cycles of diaphragmatic breathing to you to feel a little less stress. And the really cool thing is it strengthens your muscles that are used for inhalation and exhalation, which is why they're taught in rehab clinics when they might be a little bit weaker. But why am I saying to do diaphragmatic breathing? Well, it's because most people, when they breathe through their chest, and that chest lifts. Now, why is that bad? Well, when you breathe through your chest and not your belly, it puts pressure on your solar plexus nerve, which is right behind the breastbone. And that automatically increases your heart rate and blood pressure in that moment of time. So if you get stressed and you start doing this shallow, quick, fast breathing through up here, then you're going to actually increase the fight or flight response inside the body even more, and you didn't even know it, just alone from the breath. Now, in your resources tab down below, I have created a breathing exercise handout for you to take that you can try many different kinds besides just the diaphragmatic breathing, okay? But of course, a couple other things that are really great for relaxation is journaling and digital detox, right? Get rid of the phone, sit down with a good book, right? Turn off social media because that causes stress for most people, and just take the time throughout the day to do that. But last but not least, be kind to yourself. I think that we are our worst critics. We are so hard on ourselves in most cases that we really pull ourselves down. We drag down, and that's because of the negative thoughts that go through our head. So listen to your self-talk dialogue, right? When you are thinking of things, which is self-talk, so to speak, are you focusing on the positive aspects, or are you putting yourself down? And if something is bothering you, don't allow that hamster wheel, right, to keep going. Don't stew on it. You've got to take action to say, no, I need to stop thinking this way because I am good. I deserve these things. I'm worthy of it. That's the first thing, to be kind to yourself. We also need to acknowledge your success and accomplishments and let them be known, right? It's okay to toot your own horn. It's perfectly fine to do that, okay? But if you don't, how is your self-esteem going to build? Because like I said, we're our own worst enemies. So we need to make sure that you can forgive yourself, forgive others, allow your successes to shine, and let people know that you're a good, positive, happy person, because now you're being kind to yourself that way. And you can't be kind to yourself without a good social support system, right? Don't isolate yourself. Don't alienate from others who are there for you, who love you, who care about you. Communicate your feelings with others and do it so in a very positive manner. I know it's easy to point fingers and say, you did this, but try and bring it back and say, I feel this way when this occurred. That's going to be a better communication style with your support system, and you'll have less friction that way. And explore alternatives, right? Talk it out. We know that there's solutions, and there's all kinds of different solutions out there. It's not necessarily something that you have to resolve your way, because someone else's way might be a little bit better and work better. You just don't know unless you try it. So just remember, nothing will be solved effectively if you are angry or upset, because that fight or flight response is going to always kick in, right? It can be okay to be angry and upset in that moment of time, but allowing yourself be angry and upset for a long period of time is where we start to see problems arise. Overall, it's about finding something that you enjoy, taking time to practice it, because doing yoga one time or journaling one time is not going to be the solution. It's a repeated process that takes quite some time to achieve. I have a little bit of homework for you as well. I have taught stress management for years. It's one of my favorite courses to teach. I love it because there's so many different avenues and techniques and ways to deal with stuff out there. But stress, like I said, it can be very challenging to understand. And like today, you might have learned a lot about the physical body and how it related to our immune response. And so there is a documentary called Stress: Portrait of a Killer. It's on YouTube, so it's completely free. And it is fantastic to watch. And it brings on the idea that our world that we live in and how we work and deal with stress relates back to how we are in terms of health. And immune response is one of those. And it does so by looking at hierarchy, specifically within animals, and then comes back to humans. It's a great documentary. It's like about an hour long, I think. And I think that you would really enjoy it overall. So that's something you can do as a homework assignment if you choose to. But other than that, these are my sources that I got all of my information from. Some of it's from up here as well. And so I want to kind of give you guys opportunity to ask any questions over the information or anything about stress in general if you should have so. So I'll go ahead and open the floor and see where we're at. And reminder, there is a chat box. There's a feature there that you can write in questions and things of that nature as well. Let's see. All right. All right. Oh, thanks, guys. I'm reading the comments. I'm glad that you enjoyed that. Wonderful. If you ever need to, learn more, if you are wanting to get set up with, the hospital and take some classes of things of that nature, we are at Great River Medical Center. The Health Fitness gym is where I'm at and located. So I have an email address that I can send out as well to you guys. And of course, if you have questions maybe about corporate wellness as well for your own businesses and want to get some ideas of how you can make wellness a part of your employees, I'm totally available to talk more about that as well. But yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this presentation. And for those that had some comments, we are going to do the drawing. So stick around. Oh, is there? Okay. I'm looking up the comments. Okay, I see someone that says, would you have recommended a source of yoga for beginners? That's a really good question. Yoga is can be challenging. And so sometimes going to a class that you don't know is difficult. My very first recommendation for beginners of yoga is to search online. There are so many free classes on YouTube. Chair yoga is probably your best bet to start as a beginning. And then you can kind of build up because there's lots of poses, there's lots of names and things like that. And so I would definitely start with YouTube and just kind of browse and just try things out. Does anybody else have any questions before we end? All right, guys. Well, I appreciate everybody so much, and I'm glad that you were able to log on. And have a great day. Cindy's coming on here in a second.
Yeah, thank you, Tara, so much for being with us today. I know that everyone probably learned a lot, and I want to thank everyone for watching. We do have the entire Success in Business series recorded, so you can rewatch or you can see the ones that you've missed, including Next Steps, which is a 30-minute part 2 of last month's Diversity and Inclusion program. So watch for more information on our July program in the partnership newsletter and Friday Facts. It's something every chamber member will want to take advantage of. So thanks again and see you next time.